about grading and assessment and kind of philosophy of assessment, and really resonated with some of the teachers there. A couple of the teachers bristled a bit, but we started this conversation. So I got here this summer talking to Reba, and Reba's like, yeah, we started having those conversations 5 years ago. And so I'm like, all right. So I'm very grateful. I'm excited to hear what Reba and Christy have to say, and I appreciate Christy taking time out and coming. So thanks.
So as Dr. Steele said, this is just going to be a review of, like, if you've been here, we started this about 3 or 4 years ago, what our grading platform is, what are our belief statements about grading, and so we just wanted to review that. We know we have some new people joining us, and as time goes on, you know, some of those things maybe wane a little bit, and so we just want to make sure that we are all on the same page. And I want to apologize for your sheet that you got. We called it a manifesto at first, and then we were like, it has some negative kind of connotations, and then we changed it, but then I printed before I changed it. And I'm like, I'm not printing again. So ignore that word, but grading.
I think the lamination makes up for
Right. Yeah, just take it out a little bit. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is kind of go back to like some of the philosophies and thoughts that we have about grading. This is not to point fingers. This is not to like a gotcha. It's really for us to re-examine what we think about our grading practices. So we're going to go to joy.nearpod.com. I'm not going to show your name, but if you feel more comfortable using a different name, I'm fine with that as well. But it's just going to be a quick poll of some questions. Do you want to use my computer? Here, I'll open your tab.
I don't know totally how Nearpod works.
I don't know if I can do this without. That's okay. It is showing her name on it, so.
So do we need the code? Or yeah, just
That's all just there and I was like.
yes.
There we go.
Join
Join
docs.
Well, next time you do, I'll Venmo you.
It's right by my house. It's
Okay.
It's bad.
One of these was like that building. That's not my job. So I ain't about that one.
Yeah, they've been so busy.
So busy.
Okay, and was everyone able to sign in?
No, I was wrong.
Sorry.
So the first one is, do you include student behavior such as effort participation, following class rules, donating to fundraisers, not using your bathroom pads, etc. in your grade? And so far about 64% of us said no. Most of us say no. We don't put those types of behaviors in grades.
Which is good news.
Yes. Number 2, do you allow students to turn assignments in late?
I guess I'll just say yes, but that's not the yes or no question. I wish there was a depending on what it was.
Yeah, that's what I was
Category,
just saying.
because really that's
what I was
not-
just saying.
I mean, I'll say yes because that is
If
more.
you do it all, just say yes. This isn't for a grade.
Ironically.
But I know what you mean.
I'm just saying for accurate feedback,
Yeah.
it would not be A or B.
If you allow your students to turn in late assignments, do you take off points or give reduced credit for those assignments?
Some of you don't give us our answers to you by participate on that.
Okay, so a little less than half says, no, you don't take off. And about a third says yes. So pass. Do you give students the opportunity to complete extra credit or bonus work to improve their grades? So more than half, no. About a fifth, yes. Do you allow students to retake assessments or make test corrections? The majority says yes, do. If you allow retakes or test corrections, can students receive full credit? So more than half allow full credit if they're doing a retake. About a quarter says no. Do you include group work in your grades? About 50% of us say no, a third is yes.
Math people, our percentages are a little skewed because not everyone's a classroom
Yes,
teacher,
I
right?
know. Do you give a
Just making
student,
sure that's right.
a 0 for work that has not been completed?
Until it's complete. Right. But really, you don't.
Well, but so you can't kind of just do it, because I'm marking it complete, but it's a zero in grade book, but it's marked as incomplete, so I just have her doing it.
Right. So you're not really giving them a 0. You're not calculating a 0 in their grade.
No, but
when
it
they don't
shows the
complete
parents
it.
haven't done it,
Yeah,
so.
that's what I used to do too, put it in there.
And it was You can just skew.
Yeah.
Do you include formative assessments in your report card grades? Do you determine grades in a similar way to other teachers that teach your same content area?
Used to.
I'm gonna say no. I'm not. I just said I'm not sure. That all are saying
That would be good if so.
Are you confident that your grades accurately communicate mastery of the learning targets? So of the people who answered, it seems like we are confident that we are reflecting mastery within our grades. And again, many of these questions are very subjective. It is supposed to be thought-provoking and to get discussion going so that we can figure out how we can be more accurate when we are communicating what a student knows and doesn't know.
And I think based on just the little whispered discussions I overheard, it's really telling about just how complicated the issue of grading and assessment is. It's something we all were experienced as students, and for those of us who have been teaching a long time, have done for a long time. But just the fact that even some of our most experienced teachers are having thoughts and questions like, well, I sometimes do that and sometimes I do this, and it depends, just tells you how complicated this is. And one of the things I just read in a book over the weekend that really stuck with me, maybe because I've changed jobs 3 times in the last 5 years, but is that when you start a new job, that is not the only time you should ask, why do we do things the way we do them? It is something you should consistently and regularly reflect on. And so we grade stuff as teachers every day just about. But the last time we thought about why we're grading things or how we're grading them shouldn't have been our first day in the classroom 20 years ago. We continually want to reflect on those things. And so like Reba said, that's really the purpose of today, is just like a refresher. Let's reflect. Some of you may be like, I'm doing all of these things, and that's great. Share that with some of your people who aren't sure or who are answering in opposition to what you do. So one of the things that we just kind of wanted to start out revisiting, if y'all will flip on the back side of your little laminated things, these are the Homewood City Schools Guiding Principles. And some of you in this room have been here as long as me or longer. Raise your hand if you've ever seen these in written form typed out like this before. Okay, y'all, Miss Tyree has not seen it. That's a problem, okay? So, truth be told, I did not see these until 5 years ago when I was assistant principal here, and Dr. Winches showed them to me. And over the last 5 years, I have realized how much this document explains why we do what we do as a school system. And wouldn't it be nice for y'all as teachers to understand why we do some of the things we do? And so take just like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, kind of just read through these for me. And then we'll talk about them for a second. in looking at these and thinking about these, one of the things we always pride ourselves in and tout as a district is that we give teachers a lot of autonomy, right? How many of you have heard that, said that? Homewood has lots of teacher autonomy. That's a great thing. But really what that is defined autonomy, okay? Autonomy doesn't just mean wild, wild west, everybody's out on their own doing whatever they want. We have these guiding principles as kind of the guardrails to keep us all moving in the same direction towards our mission, right? And in our district, we're awesome at knowing our mission. I think I could call on any one of you and you could say verbatim what our mission is: to educate and empower all students to maximize their unique potential. But that's really big and broad, right? So these are kind of the guardrails to keep us all moving towards that. Within those guardrails, you guys have all kinds of autonomy in your classroom of how we get there. But when you're wondering things like, why are we on a block schedule at the middle school? Look at the second one. K-8, focus intensely on literacy and numeracy as the key foundational skills. That is why you have 90 minutes of language, arts, and math instruction every day, as opposed to social studies and science being half the year in 6th and 7th grade. And we kind of adjusted that over time in 8th grade to prepare for high school. But that's when someone says, why do we have English every day for 90 minutes? Well, it goes back to K-8, our focus is on literacy and numeracy. Okay, so you can think about lots of things we do and kind of tie them back to one of the guiding principles. Obviously today we're focusing on that last one that says we value and therefore focus on mastery of standards and the accurate reporting of progress towards these goals. Okay, so what words in that sentence stand out to you as being important to grading and assessment? If we had to pick 2 or 3 words in that sentence that are most important, what would you say?
I like value.
Accurate, value, value,
Standard progress.
standards, progress,
Learning.
learning, okay? Anyone think mastery? Okay. So I said some of those too. So when we're thinking about how we're assessing students, how we're assigning grades, what our grading policies and procedures are in our classroom, we need to think back on this guiding principle. Are our grades accurate? Are they about learning? Are they about mastery? Right? So under that sort of umbrella, like Reba said, about 5 years ago, the 2016-17 school year, some of you were here for this when I got on like my grading platform. I just, had done some book studies in the district about grading. Some of y'all may remember Ken O'Connor, who's like my grading guru, came to Homewood and did PD. He got kind of a mixed reaction, I think, to his presentation, especially at the high school. But I loved him, and so we kind of started working on that here. So in 2016 and 17, you can flip that if you want, we first started just looking at Ken O'Connor's, got this book, 15 Fixes for Broken Grades. And I focused here at the middle school on just the ones that distort achievement. What are the practices we use in our classroom that distort that accurate reporting of standards mastery, right? That was kind of the low-hanging fruit, sort of like a good starting place, because if you think about, if I give you all the example, how many of you would give someone a 100 quiz grade for bringing in 10 canned foods? It's pretty easy for everyone to understand how that might misrepresent how much a student has learned, right? Because the canned foods are not in any way related to your math standards. So we kind of started with that, just looking at what are some things that might distort achievement. We did a lot of that in PD and embedded time. Then in 2017 and 18, we started working on developing this platform that was originally called the Manifesto. And then Paul Litton, I think, was the one who was like, that sounds kind of creepy. Can we change the name? I was like, yeah, it does sound kind of creepy. But this was a group effort. This was not Christy York just saying, we all need to do this. This took 3 full years of getting to this. If y'all remember, we had sticky notes up in that conference room, and we were like wordsmithing the heck out of this belief statement, grade level by grade level, as a school. But what we all determined, when I say all, I say 80% plus. Yeah. Dr. Winch has always taught me that you're never going to get 100%, but if you can get 80, you're good to move forward. And I remember being in ILT, do y'all remember the old ILT, and Aaron Klotz said, I think you've got 80, can we move on? Okay, yeah, that's good. But it was a slow, I say that for you new people to know, like this was a slow process that we all came to agreement on. And then we worked that year on one of Ken O'Connor's kind of guiding principles was about sample student performance. You don't have to grade everything and put everything in the grade book, and it really got into that formative versus summative assessment. And Ms. Hudson's going to talk about that and review some of that in just a minute. But what we ended up on is this, okay, this is what we believe grades are. Grades, the purpose is to communicate the degree to which a student has mastered the learning targets. And then we said, okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? What are kind of our guide rails, sort of our guiding principles as a district at the school level in terms of grading? So we said grades only reflect mastery of learning targets. That's pretty much verbatim from the guiding principles, right? Students will have multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery. That's one of those examples of defined autonomy, right? We're loose on some things and tight on other things. What we need to be tight on is that students have multiple opportunities. What that looks like in your classroom, you have the autonomy to decide. It might be test corrections, it might be retakes, it might be varied assessment methods where you let one kid write an essay, one kid create a project or a visual presentation or whatever. You can match that to your students' needs, your content area, what you're trying to assess. Does that make sense? And then students will receive feedback on behaviors separate from the mastery of learning targets. Behaviors are important. I would say at middle school, it's one of the times they're most important. These adolescent brains are developing, they're changing, they're forming habits and behaviors that are going to impact them in the future. We don't want to say don't put behaviors in your grade and just forget about if a kid has terrible work ethic or never completes work on time or talks too much or doesn't work well with others. Those are super important. I could make an argument that some of them are as important as their academic mastery, right? But if we believe report card grades are about mastery of learning targets, we need a separate way of reporting those. And so some of you, and I honestly don't know where y'all are now with that, but I know a couple years ago, teams were kind of giving either every 9 weeks or every semester a kind of breakdown of here are the behaviors that aren't reported in the report card grade, but are important to give parents and students feedback on. If I'm a parent, I'm great with Grant getting 3s in whatever, reading nonfiction text, but what I really want to know is he a jerk? Like, is he nice to people or is he a bully? Like those are important things to know too and to communicate to. So this is kind of where we ended up, but before you can give grades, you have to assess them, right? You have to have something to grade. So Ms. Hudson's going to kind of just review this formative summative piece.
So for the most part, we all know like what formative is and what summative is. I feel like for a lot of us, we feel like if we don't give a grade for something, then the kids won't think it's important. And that is true to a certain extent, but we have to remember like why we are grading. So you shouldn't put so much pressure on yourself to grade everything you give. Because if we go back to the belief about multiple opportunities to learn, that means in our classrooms, most of our instruction, those are the multiple opportunities. It doesn't mean everything has to be graded. So we can think about many ways to formatively assess. Remember, formative is about getting information about what they know. So that is, practice problems, that is homework, that is using Quizzes or Quizlet or Bookit or all those different platforms. That is providing multiple opportunities to learn. And so most of what we put our energy into is teaching them in that instruction that leads to learning. And then at the end, we assess them and say, have you gained these skills? So we're thinking about formative. Remember, we're just monitoring or guiding the process. What's going to happen next? If they did this, where do I need to go with my instruction? That's formative. At the end, summative is, okay, I've given you all these tools, I've given you all these resources, now show me what you know. And summative could be a quiz, because if you've taught like I know in math, in 6th grade math when I was there, I would teach like 1 or 2 skills, and we would go over those skills, and then we would quiz, because that was going to be on the test. That was formative because I still had time to help them, but it was also summative in the extent to, I've taught this like multiple times, I've given you opportunities, and now I need to know what you know. So that's where the subjectivity comes in, and yes, we're going to grade quizzes, but you have to think about all the other things we are grading. And so you don't have to put so much effort into, I assigned it, I'm going to grade it. Really, it's I assigned it, I need to give you feedback. That's the mindset that we need to have. So when you're thinking about, is this for information or is this to show me what you know? What's the purpose of that assignment? What time is the assessment? Is it during the process of learning or is it after? And then what types of assessment techniques am I using? Informal observation, like I said, quizzes to a certain extent. If you give a quiz and 80% of your kids do not do well, then that is something about the instruction that we need to go back. I would not count that. So that would not be a grade because it does not accurately reflect mastery. Apparently something went wrong in my instruction and I have to go back. So it's just thinking about those things as you go. So definition-wise, or how we should think about it, formative is an assessment designed to provide direction for improvement and or adjustment to a program for individual students or for a whole class. Sometimes it's just a few students. You give a quiz and just a few haven't gotten this concept, you know you need to go back. Sometimes it might be the whole class. Summative is the assessment evaluation designed to provide information to be based on a judgment of their achievement at the end of a period or at the end of like a chapter or unit or whatever you're studying. But the reasons we don't include formative assessments in grades. So students concentrate on learning from mistakes instead of suffering the disappointment of lower grades. When we started going through this platform and I started doing something different in my class, I stopped putting grades on even quizzes and tests. Now, it took me a long time to score their tests and quizzes. What I was doing is, I called it highlighter grading. And at first, the kids hated it because they were just like, what did I make? I mean, I had Chandler at that point, and she was just like, I just want to know the score. And I'm like, you'll get it later, but tell me what you need to know. So I would go through and I would highlight if something was wrong, and sometimes I might put a question. Sometimes I might just put a thought for them to think about, and then they would have to go back and make corrections. And I realize that takes a lot of your time, and I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just telling you that the purpose of our instruction and the purpose of giving a formative assessment is to give them feedback. Research shows that feedback is what moves their learning forward. If I give them a quiz and there's a red 56 right there circled, do you think they're going to care what they missed? They're not. They care that they got a 56. Now they're mad about it and they're pouting about it, and that's it. They push it to the side and what's next? Or can I retake it? Or I don't want to show my parents this. But what I learned is just by giving them feedback, by the end of the year, they were all looking for their feedback and going and making corrections and telling me what they missed because they didn't get the grade until they did all that. And then that was also preparing them for their retake. So they were actually making those test corrections and knowing what they needed to work on. But I've seen several ways different teachers do this. Some make a chart of like emojis, and like each one just means a different thing so that you don't have to go and comment on everybody's paper. But if they're doing, in writing, it'll be easier for you to say this face means you didn't use capitalization, and this face means you didn't put an end mark. And so you could just put that and they just look at their chart and see what they did. That's a way to give feedback. But there are many creative ways to do that. Remember, feedback is what drives the learning. And then in the end, yes, they will get a grade. But everything does not have to be based on grading. So if we don't grade formative assessments, students are less anxious about their work. They engage, or students engage less in cheating. I will tell you this year, in 6th grade, I don't know about 7 and 8, we've had more cheaters. Like people, like, I won't say I'm cheating. Students cheating. Sorry, we don't like that word. Students cheating on things, and every time they're sent to the office, why did you do this? Like, tell me. My mom said I need A's and B's. Like, everything always goes back to grading. And we understand grades are here. You know, we need them for scholarships. We need them for so many things. But it is like stressing them out to the point that they would just rather cheat and get the score than even focus on what the instruction was. And that is so sad, especially them growing up thinking like, this is the only way I can get there. So we have to find better ways to communicate with our students what their knowledge or level of mastery is. But if we don't grade these things, if we're giving them multiple opportunities to succeed and fail, because you learn more in your failures sometimes, but it does build student-teacher relationships. Like I said, at the beginning when I started that, my students hated it. They were just like, give me the grade, I don't care. But I just stayed with it, and then by the end, they were helping each other. And like that was the year I was working on national boards, and one of my videos was like a test correction session where I had grouped them by the problems that they missed, and they were like going through helping each other. Like, remember she said this part was highlighted, so this means that. And it was just amazing to see them talking about their learning, not about their grading. But students just learn more and perform better on summative assessments when we've taken the time to provide them with multiple opportunities to get feedback and to work on those things. And student comparisons of teacher grading systems vanish. I'm sure you guys are aware that every year parents hear about teachers in the school, and they will call and say, I want my kid place so and so and so and so. Whether they truly know whether they truly know about the teacher or they just heard something about the teacher. We have autonomy, yes, but we need to be on the same page when it comes to demonstrating mastery. We all should be giving the same level of rigor, and we all should be focusing on our instructional methods that help students meet mastery. We always are going to have those parents that do that, but we need to be on a level where...
So what are some alternatives? Report separately, parent communication. You know, I'm not saying behaviors aren't important to communicate about. They just don't belong in an academic grade. Your late work policies. Think about what is the purpose of the assignment. When you're grading it and giving them a 50 for something being late, that 50 is saying they mastered half of the learning target, right? Is that what you're really communicating, or are you communicating that they turned it in 5 days late? What could be some alternatives to that? Could you report that as a behavior, that they don't complete work on time? Could you still give it a grade and dock it, but keep it the same letter grade? Like in my classroom, if it was late, you couldn't earn higher than the lowest number grade. So like if they made a 40, if they would have made a 100, but it was late, they got a 90. So A-level mastery, but I had a little dig in there, I guess. If I could go back, I maybe wouldn't even do that. But that's where I really struggled with the late work piece, and that was kind of how I compromised with myself. And that proves a point that this is a process, okay? Philosophically, you kind of have to work through and get experience and get yourself to where you are on these beliefs. Extra credit and bonus work. Is what you're giving them, is it demonstrating, is it related to the learning targets? Is it demonstrating additional mastery or higher level learning? If so, there's nothing wrong with extra credit and bonus work. If it's, you know, make a poster for the pep rally and you get some extra points on your test grade, that's not really related to the standard. But if it's, you know, analyze these current event articles and tie them to what we've been learning about this unit, that's great. I know y'all do you do bowl effects? No, 7th grade did bowl effects, where it's higher level math problems and they can earn some points for that. It's still tied to the learning. Cheating policies. Is cheating a behavior or a grade? When a kid cheats and gets a 0, is that 0 saying they cheated or they didn't learn anything? Okay? They probably didn't learn anything if they had to cheat. But how could you address that situation differently? Make them redo it. Give them a disciplinary consequence to go along with it. You're going to come retake that test on Saturday while you're in Saturday school for teaching. And you've got the discipline consequence for the behavior of cheating, and you've got a grade when they retake it in a supervised setting that accurately demonstrates mastery, right?
Something I've heard from some teachers just recently is actually some of the cheaters are actually really high-performing, driven students, and they're dealing with pressure from parents who said, don't come home without an A or a B.
Yep.
And so sometimes those kids that cheat, they really might know it really well, but they're obsessing over getting the 100 or the straight A's.
Yeah. Group work. You know, the whole theory of learn it together, perform it alone. If my own child this week was so irritated with the group work assignment. You know, the classic first board, type A. I did all the work and I'm going to get a bad grade because they didn't do their part and blah, 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 blah. And is that grade really going to demonstrate her mastery of what she was supposed to learn? No, because she's going to be brought down by the duds in her group, right? But is group work awesome? Yes. Do students learn really well when they get the opportunity to collaborate? Yes. Let them learn together, but make sure the grades you're giving for that are accurately reflecting their mastery. And then homework is always the most contentious area. I remember Dr. Henneke saying when he taught in Texas like 25 years ago, Ken O'Connor came to his school district and was talking about this same thing that we're still talking about today in 2021, and that there were high school math teachers that were really crying during the presentation, like mourning and grieving the idea, no offense math people, but he said he saw it, math teachers crying that they were being told not to grade homework anymore. So you've got to reflect on, like Ms. Hudson said, what is the purpose of homework? Is it formative or summative? Is not doing your homework going to eventually show up in the grade? Probably. If you don't do your homework for the entire unit, you're probably not going to do well on the summative assessment, and that's going to show up. If it doesn't, if you can get an A on the test without doing the homework, did you need it?
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the kind of questions you need to be asking yourself. Is completing homework a behavior? Absolutely. Do parents and students need to know because you're not doing your homework, your grade is suffering, your learning is suffering? Absolutely. Okay? So those are just the kind of things that we think about distorting achievement. And again, most of you know this, but it's just a refresher because like I said, we've got to constantly be reflecting on why we do what we do.
Okay, so we have some scenarios of just things that could happen or may have happened or things you may have experienced in your classroom, and then it gives you a traditional response. So this is probably what normally would happen in another school district. But we're going to say, we just want you to read through it together and then come up with what is the problem with responding that way? Like, how does it go against our guiding principles? How does it go against our belief statements about grading? And then what would be a better response to that? And then what are the benefits to that response? So since we are kind of pushed for time a little bit, just pick one. So you're going to work in your groups. So just pick one, look through the titles. And work in groups are 2 or 3.
I wish there was a way we could have a quick discussion.
Academic levels. The student understood their teacher administration around
And then we'll let Ms. Short end it for us. But did anybody talk about the students misuse cell phones in class?
That's not a problem here.
Y'all talked about that one?
Yeah, it was just hers.
What was so in this scenario, basically they're using their cell phones, the teacher is upset about it, but it is, yeah, this is a carpentry class, so it does present like hazards with them on their cell phone. So he enforces this policy that you can get a 0 to 5, and if you're caught texting or using your phone, you get a 0 for the day. And so by the end of the term, like, all their grades are suffering because they won't put the cell phones away. So what was the alternative response?
We just had, I mean, I said it just has to do with the climate the teacher creates in the classroom, or what are the expectations? You know, are you allowed to use your device? Are you not allowed to use your device? If you're not allowed to use it, where is it supposed to be? And what's the signal that it's okay for you to use your device at this time? And what's the purpose for using the device? So I think a lot of it's about creating the classroom environment. But man, this person, like, scaling students every single day and rating them every single day, that's just not practical. That's not practical. And plus, what I really saw was all the onus was on the teacher. There's nothing about the student changing their behavior. So I think establishing that classroom climate and them understanding why we do it, why we don't, you know, when to do it, when not to do it, is a more important thing that involves them.
Perfect. What about student refuses to do homework? Did anybody do that one? Okay.
Saturday school.
So in this scenario, same concept. This is a math teacher. She knows you must practice. She gives homework every night. This one student just refuses to do it, but on her assessment, she's making consistently like 90% or in that range. But by the end of the grading period, she has a 70. So what did y'all talk about?
Well, the problem is that that grade doesn't reflect her mastery of the content.
Right.
It's reflecting her behavior, but not, because if she's scoring in the 90% range for the assessment, she obviously understands the
Right.
material.
And every kid learns at a different rate, you know, and some kids can do 4 problems and they got it, and some kids need the 20. And it's not fair to penalize those kids that are getting it just because they're, you know, they're not doing their homework, but they're getting a 90. They're obviously, they know what they're doing.
Can you tell us what you said about that changed you?
Well, that's what, you know, made me switch over, because I had, you know, when I have these high-level kids, and, you know, a lot of them weren't doing their work, but they were, you know, they were passing the test, but then their A's went to B's or C's because of the homework grade, and that didn't reflect their mastery. They did really know it, so that's what turned me.
Can I ask you a follow-up question to that? Did you see a significant number of kids quit doing their homework when they realized it wasn't counting towards their grade?
At first I did, but then when they finally realized, oh, if you look at my homework grade and then look at my test grade, it's like,
There's a
oh, it
correlation.
does. Yeah, there's a correlation. It does matter. And the second they got that, they realized how important it was, and they saw their grades go up. So, you know, that was all of our concerns when we first started doing this. Well, it's not going to count, they're not going to do it. But they finally figured out that there is a big correlation, that, yeah, we're not putting a grade in the grade book for your homework, but guess what? It's on that test score. So,
And middle schoolers, of all people, sometimes have to learn the hard way, right?
yep.
Well, and when that came out, I remember the elementary schools bought heavy into that, and all of a sudden it was, oh, math is optional. And as a parent, we were sitting here going, what? What do you mean math is optional? Because we were like, they're going to have homework every night in the middle school. Like,
Yeah.
you can't do that. And especially at the elementary level, they would assign it if they needed to. But as a parent, we were like, well, how are we supposed to know? Are they supposed to be doing it? Are they not? I mean, I know it's optional, but, and I was the mean parent. I was like, you're going to do it anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
I think going through this is when I changed, like, yes, as a math teacher, I gave homework Monday through Thursday. They needed to practice, but it went from being like a worksheet, do these problems, odds or evens, or do the front, do the back. So I started making a weekly sheet, because I know the students have outside activities, and those are important, but you still need to practice. And like she said, some students need a few problems. You know, it doesn't take 50 problems to get it. And so each day, they just had 10 problems, but they had the sheet on Monday, so they could complete it as we went through it. So just to give them a chance to practice.
The other thing I'd point out about homework, aside from it being a behavior, and I know you guys are aware of this, but it oftentimes reflects support at home, which has nothing to do with the student's responsibility or academic proficiency. It's the environment they're in.
On the back, the first scenario was student plagiarizes a speech. Did anyone do that one?
Oh, yes, we did. So we just said to send them to Cyrus Fort to address the behavior, but then to change the question or like give her blank paper and say write it.
So, yeah, we wouldn't just give the 0 because that still doesn't show mastery of whatever that standard was. But we do have other resources and options like Saturday school that we can resort to. And then the last one, the student delivers a project 3 days late. And then this teacher is 10% off every day it's late. So by the end, the student had a 58, it dropped to a 49. Did anybody do?
Okay, yes, that's the one that we did, and we looked at it and said that there was, consequences given, that affected the grade for it being late. It didn't reflect what the student knew. And, one of the other things that we discussed was it didn't matter how well the assignment was or the project. The student was almost behind the 8 ball turning it in because, I mean, overall grade dropping from a 58 to 49 simply because it was late. So, yeah, didn't reflect what he knew, consequence given for late work, not what the student knew.
And I think in that respect that more students are less likely to complete light work if they know, like, I'm not even going to get credit for this or it's going to get cut so much, like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of me doing this?
I definitely found that. I mean, social studies is not a class where we give tons of practice homework per se. At least in my classroom, it was always more like reflection or projects or finish this because we didn't finish in class. And that's what I found is as long as I just checked did they do it or not, they would end up doing it. But if they thought, well, I've already gotten a 0, then why go back and do it if I can't have the opportunity? And Jamika said something that made me think of another thing when she said they're kind of starting behind the 8 ball. Another thing we haven't really talked about, but I'll just put my little plea in there, is think about those grades lower than a 50. What motivation does a kid have when they get a 3 on their report card in math for the first 9 weeks? If you had a 3 and you know mathematically there was no way to pass and you were going to summer school no matter what, and you knew that October 8th, what would you do for the rest of the school year? A 50 is an F. A 50 still communicates you failed to master the standards, but it gives them a chance. And I read this quote this weekend and I went back to my notes for today and put it in there. I'm reading this leadership book right now, but it says, only those who believe that they can get better make an effort to do so. If you already think it's done, why are you going to put forth the effort? And in my opinion, effort is one of those behaviors we really want to promote in our kids. So if you were here 5 years ago when we started all this, I'm sorry you had to hear it again, but I hope it gave you some more things to think about. If you're new, I hope it gives you some perspective. And y'all just, Dr. Steele, Reba, me, none of us tend to want to like be leaders by mandate. We don't want to just come in and say, do this because we said to do it. We want you to understand the why. That's why we gave you the guiding principles. Any one of us is open to conversations. If you're sitting there and thinking, I think Miss York's full of crap, come talk to me about it. Like, I want to have those conversations with you. I never want you to just do it because that's what I said to do. I want you to actually buy into it and believe in it and have that conversation. So thank you for your time.
I know Dr. Knowles has more energy than any other human I've ever met when we had him here, but I loved that he came into our rooms and he saw our assessments and he would like ask, like, why do you ask this question? What do you want the kids to get from that? That made me a better teacher, and I really changed a lot of my assessments, but I kind of don't know if anybody knows what we're assessing any longer. I mean, we do this, which I think is huge for like the philosophical point
Sure.
of view, but then the practical, how and why do you assess the way you do? Like, let's look at your lesson plans, let's
Yeah.
look at your stuff. I would invite that.
I think that's a great point, and think of today as kind of a starting point for
Yeah.
furthering that. I know Ms. Hudson and Dr. Seal have plans to continue this conversation and get more into the weeds on some of this. And I think that's a great
Yeah,
suggestion, and I experienced that too, and I thought that was great.
And there'd be times he'd look at a question and be like, what skill are you asking? And I'd be like, you're right. What skill am I asking?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's take it
Yeah.
off. Let's rework it.
Absolutely.
And it was really helpful.
I think that's a great suggestion.
I scheduled an email, so it should be already there, but it's just like thanking you, but it also has like a little reflection. It's just a few questions on a Google form and things like that. Those are the things we need to know as we plan ahead and how do we proceed and how do we keep this going. So please take just a few minutes to fill that out.
Real quick, Christy loaned me her book. This is a real short read, the 15 fixes for broken grades. We could probably find funds. If you're interested in a copy, please let me know. The other thing I was reminded of, this book, John Hattie, he's like the guru, an Australian researcher for what impacts learning. He did 800 meta-analyses. A meta-analysis is a synthesis of a whole bunch of studies. So it's like millions of kids involved in this. And he ranked like 150 behaviors that have an impact on learning. Number 4 was formative assessment, formative evaluation. So the assessments that we're doing, I know it takes work, but it has a huge impact on student learning. That's what the research says anyway. Thank you for your willingness to reflect on this, because I know it's work, but thank you.
You
Y'all
can
have a
leave these
great
on your
day. It was
table,
so good
but
to see you.